Throughout China's storied past, the role of concubines has been multifaceted. While they occasionally held significant influence, their lives were often characterized by grim realities and oppressive customs. The following are 10 examples of the harrowing experiences that were once deemed normal for Chinese concubines. Number 1. Forced entry into the harem. The system of concubinage, deeply entrenched in Chinese society, was often not a matter of choice for many of the women and young girls who found themselves within its confines. The very act of becoming a concubine was frequently initiated by force or deception. Rural areas in ancient China were rife with tales of young girls, some barely in their teens, being kidnapped by traffickers. These traffickers, realizing the profitability of the trade, would often target vulnerable families or orphaned children. In some instances, the allure of monetary gain led impoverished parents or relatives to sell their daughters into concubinage. It was not uncommon for a family facing severe financial hardship to view their daughter as a means to settle debts or gain some respite from relentless poverty. Such transactions were typically facilitated by intermediaries, often elderly women known as matchmakers, who specialized in the procurement of potential concubines. These matchmakers would approach struggling families with the promise of a better life for their daughters, often masking the grim realities of the life that awaited these young girls. Once a girl was earmarked for the life of a concubine, her fate was virtually sealed. Whether she was kidnapped or sold, she would be taken to a place where she would be groomed for her new role. This preparation involved rigorous training in the arts, manners, and other skills deemed essential to please their future master. The transition was harsh, and many a young girl was molded, often against her will, into an embodiment of grace and allure, designed solely for the pleasure and pride of her future owner. This system of acquiring concubines was not limited to the lower echelons of society. The elite and the royals, too, frequently expanded their harems through similar means. Dynastic politics often saw regional lords offering their daughters, sisters, or other female relatives to the emperor or other powerful figures as a means to forge political alliances or curry favor. While these women might have lived in opulence compared to those in lesser households, their entry into the harem was still largely involuntary. In reflecting upon this practice, it becomes evident that the system was not just about satisfying the desires of the wealthy and powerful. It was also emblematic of a deeply patriarchal society, where the commodification of women was normalized and where their wishes, dreams, and aspirations were frequently overshadowed by the ambitions and desires of men. Number 2. No legal standing or rights. Within the hierarchical structures of ancient Chinese society, concubines occupied a peculiar space. They were neither fully recognized as wives, nor were they mere servants. This ambiguous status meant that they often existed without a clear legal standing, leaving them vulnerable and without recourse to justice or protection. Historically, Chinese legal systems prioritized the male lineage. Wives, despite being subordinated to their husbands, held a recognized position within the household. Their primary function was to bear legitimate offspring, particularly male heirs, to continue the family line. In contrast, concubines, though they could also bear children, were considered secondary. Their offspring, while recognized, were not accorded the same status or rights as those of the primary wife. This differential treatment extended beyond issues of lineage. Concubines had no legal recourse if they were mistreated or discarded. Their well-being was entirely at the discretion of the head of the household. If a concubine faced abuse, either from the master or from other members of the household, her options for seeking justice or protection were limited, if not non-existent. Furthermore, in matters of inheritance, children born to concubines faced disadvantages. Though they might inherit, their share was often smaller than that of the children of the primary wife. The societal logic here was clear. These children, while part of the family, were reminders of their mother's lower status. It's worth noting that the very existence of concubinage was a manifestation of a societal structure that prioritized male desires and aspirations. The system was underpinned by a belief in the inherent superiority of men and the consequential subordination of women. The lack of legal standing for concubines was not an oversight, but a deliberate design, ensuring that these women remained subservient, controlled, and above all, powerless. In this environment, the life of a concubine was one of uncertainty and dependence. Without rights or recognition, she was at the mercy of those above her in the social hierarchy. Her value was determined by her ability to serve, please, and bear children. Beyond these functions, she was largely invisible, a silent figure navigating the peripheries of a world that refused to fully acknowledge her humanity. Number 3. Rituals of presentation and approval. The life of a concubine in ancient China was marked by a series of rituals and ceremonies, each one underlining her status and role within the household. Among the most crucial were the rituals of presentation and approval, which determined her entry into her new life. Upon being selected or procured for a household, a potential concubine wouldn't be immediately integrated. First, she would undergo a thorough examination, which often meant more than just a physical assessment. The examining parties, which might include the master's close confidants or even the primary wife, would evaluate her for her beauty, grace, and potential to bear children. They might also assess her for traits deemed desirable, such as musical ability, knowledge of poetry, or other artistic talents. This scrutiny was exhaustive and could be deeply humiliating, as the young woman was often paraded and displayed. If she passed this initial assessment, the concubine-to-be would then be introduced to the master. This event was laden with symbolism. She would be bathed, dressed in fine garments, and adorned with jewelry to highlight her beauty and appeal. The manner in which she was presented was deliberate, emphasizing her role as an object of pleasure and desire. In households of nobility or royalty, the rituals became even more elaborate. Astrological readings might be taken to ensure that the potential concubine was auspicious for the master. Ceremonial feasts and performances could accompany her presentation, turning the event into a grand spectacle, a testament to the master's wealth and influence. But underlying these ceremonies was a stark power dynamic. The concubine was a subject, subjected to the whims and desires of those in power. Her worth was constantly evaluated, her personhood frequently overshadowed by her role as a commodity. Every aspect of these rituals, from her preparation to the final approval, served as a reminder of her position in the hierarchy. For those outside the immediate sphere of the concubinage system, these rituals may have appeared beautiful, even romantic. The opulence, the artistry, and the grandeur could mask the underlying currents of subjugation. But for the women at the heart of these ceremonies, they were poignant reminders of their lack of agency. The rituals of presentation and approval were not just processes. They were symbolic enactments of the concubine's position in society, valued for her beauty and ability to bear children, but ultimately controlled by forces beyond her power. Number 4, jealousy and intrigue among the harem. The harem, often romanticized in literature and art, was far from the idyllic sanctuary it was sometimes portrayed to be. Behind the ornate doors and gilded screens, a complex web of jealousy, intrigue, and power plays unraveled, driven by the desire for favor and the fear of oblivion. In households that maintained multiple concubines, competition was inevitable. Each concubine vied for the attention and favor of the master, fully aware that his preference could dictate her quality of life. A favored concubine enjoyed privileges such as luxurious quarters, access to finer clothing and jewelry, and most importantly, a more secure future. But these privileges were fickle, contingent on the master's changing moods and preferences. Yet within this web of jealousy and intrigue, alliances were also formed. Concubines, recognizing the shared nature of their plight, would sometimes band together for mutual support and protection. These alliances could serve as a defense against a particularly cruel master or a domineering primary wife. However, the very nature of the harem meant that these alliances were fragile. The master's favor was a limited resource, and a rise in the fortunes of one concubine often meant the fall of another. Today's ally could be tomorrow's rival, a reality that only further fueled the undercurrents of suspicion and competition. Navigating the internal politics of the harem required skill, wit, and a fair amount of luck. While some concubines managed to secure lasting favor and even wield significant influence behind the scenes, others found themselves cast aside, victims of the ever-shifting sands of harem politics. The harem was a microcosm of the larger society outside its walls, reflecting the same battles for power, recognition, and survival. But for the women trapped within, the stakes were deeply personal, with every intrigue bearing direct consequences on their lives and futures. Number 5. Physical punishment and abuse. Behind the veneer of elegance and affluence that often characterized the households of ancient China, a darker narrative prevailed for many concubines. Vulnerable due to their ambiguous status and stripped of agency, these women were frequently subjected to both physical and psychological abuse. Physical punishment was not uncommon. For perceived transgressions, which could range from failing to please the master to getting embroiled in harem intrigues, concubines could face a variety of punishments. These included beatings, confinement to dark and cramped spaces, or being denied food. The tools of punishment varied, from canes and whips to more subtle methods like forcing the concubine to stand for extended periods in the cold or heat. But the physical scars were just one aspect of the abuse. The psychological torment was equally, if not more, damaging. Concubines lived with the constant threat of displacement or discard, the fear of being replaced by a younger or more favored woman, or the anxiety over bearing a child, especially a male heir, weighed heavily on their minds. Some masters wielded this fear as a tool of control, reminding concubines of their replaceability and emphasizing their dependency. Jealousy within the harem added another layer of psychological strain. As mentioned earlier, the competition was fierce, and the methods of intrigue often took a mental toll. A concubine could wake up one day to find her personal belongings vandalized or her reputation tarnished by baseless rumors. The environment of mistrust and constant surveillance meant that genuine friendships or alliances were rare and always under threat. In the shadows of this systemic oppression, many concubines bore their pain in silence. Moments of solace were few, and any semblance of personal agency was hard-won. Their stories, though interspersed with instances of resilience and moments of triumph, were overwhelmingly characterized by an enduring struggle against a system that saw them as assets rather than individuals. For many, the physical and mental scars of their ordeal remained long after their tenure in the harem, a haunting reminder of the price they paid for a society's ambitions and desires. Number 6. The pressure to bear a male heir. In a society where lineage and legacy were paramount, the value of a woman, especially a concubine, was often intrinsically linked to her fertility and her ability to produce male heirs. The importance of continuing the family line, especially through male descendants, was a deeply entrenched cultural norm in ancient China, making the birth of a son a celebrated event, while the birth of a daughter was often met with subdued, if not outright disappointed, reactions. For concubines, this societal expectation took on heightened importance. Their primary function, in the eyes of many masters, was to supplement the family's line, especially if the primary wife was unable to produce a male heir. A concubine who bore a son could see her status within the household rise significantly. Such an achievement could bring with it better living conditions, more respect from household members, and a sense of security in her position. However, the flip side of this potential reward was the immense pressure and anxiety associated with childbearing. Every pregnancy brought with it hopes and expectations, and the birth of a daughter, or worse, repeated miscarriages, could lead to the concubine facing disdain, neglect, or even expulsion. In some extreme cases, the inability to produce a male heir could result in physical punishment or abuse. The emotional toll on these women was profound. The fear of not meeting expectations, coupled with the inherent risks of childbirth in an age without modern medical facilities, made pregnancy a daunting prospect. Many concubines lived in a perpetual state of anxiety, acutely aware that their position in the household, and in some cases their very survival, might depend on the outcome of their pregnancies. But amidst these pressures, it's essential to remember the individual stories of these women. Each pregnancy, each birth, was a deeply personal experience. Behind the societal expectations and political implications were women navigating the challenges of motherhood, often under incredibly stressful conditions. Their joys, fears, hopes, and disappointments were as varied and profound as those of any mother, even if the weight of tradition and societal expectation often overshadowed their individual experiences. Number 7. Limited mobility and seclusion. For concubines in ancient China, the world was often confined to the parameters of the household they inhabited. Their reality was one of restriction and containment, with their mobility being severely limited and their interactions with the outside world curtailed. The reasons for such restrictions were manifold. First and foremost, it was a means of control. By limiting a concubine's mobility, the master ensured her complete dependence on him and the household. Every aspect of her life, from the clothes she wore to the food she ate, was determined by her standing within the household and the favor she enjoyed. By keeping her isolated, there was also little chance of her forming external alliances or seeking help to escape an abusive environment. Additionally, this seclusion was tied to notions of purity and propriety. A concubine's value, especially in the elite households, was linked to her exclusivity. Allowing her to freely interact with the world outside could lead to rumors, gossip, or questions about her fidelity. In an age where a woman's virtue was prized, and where even the slightest hint of impropriety could lead to scandal, ensuring the seclusion of concubines was deemed necessary. Such isolation extended beyond physical barriers. Concubines had limited access to news or events from the outside world. Their knowledge was often second-hand, passed down from servants or other members of the household. This lack of information further entrenched their vulnerability, keeping them unaware and thus powerless about larger societal changes or movements that could impact their lives. This confinement wasn't solely physical. The psychological impact was profound. The lack of external stimuli, the monotony of daily life, and the absence of fresh perspectives could lead to feelings of stagnation, depression, and hopelessness. Many concubines might have felt trapped, not just by the walls around them, but by the circumstances of their existence. In the annals of history, the seclusion of concubines might seem like a mere footnote, an expected aspect of their existence. But it is emblematic of the larger narrative of female subjugation in ancient societies. Their isolation was not just physical. It was emblematic of their societal position, seen, desired, but ultimately confined and controlled. In their silence and seclusion, the concubine stories speak volumes about a world that desired their beauty but feared their agency. Number 8. End of favor, desertion, or worse. The life of a concubine was inextricably tied to the whims and desires of her master. While moments of favor could bring privileges and comfort, the end of such favor often carried with it harsh and unforgiving consequences. The fickle nature of human affection meant that a concubine's position was perennially precarious. As youth faded, as newer concubines arrived, or as political and familial dynamics shifted, many found themselves facing an uncertain, if not grim, future. Neglect was one of the more common outcomes for concubines who fell out of favor. Once doted upon, they might now find themselves relegated to the peripheries of the household. Resources such as clothing, food, and personal attendance that were once granted generously might become scarce. Left to languish in the less maintained sections of the residence, these women would become mere shadows, their previous status a distant memory. But neglect was often just the tip of the iceberg. In some cases, concubines were outright expelled from the household. With no resources, no legal standing, and often no family to return to, these women faced daunting prospects. Some might find shelter in temples, taking vows of religious life as a means of survival. Others, less fortunate, could find themselves in brothels or on the streets, their pasts as concubines a haunting contrast to their present destitution. For those who managed to avoid such dire fates, the psychological impact of falling out of favor was profound. From being the center of attention, they now had to navigate feelings of rejection, isolation, and uncertainty about their future. The mental toll could lead to a host of issues, from depression to other mental health challenges. Yet it is essential to remember that even in these moments of despair, the human spirit often found ways to endure and adapt. Some concubines, recognizing the impermanence of favor, built support systems among themselves, sought solace in arts or religion, or even used their wits to navigate the complex dynamics of their environment. The end of favor for a concubine was emblematic of her entire existence, one defined by external perceptions and desires. Yet within this framework of subjugation and dependency, many sought and found ways to assert their agency, however limited, showcasing resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Number 9. Lack of proper burial rites. Death, in many cultures, offers a transition into the afterlife, a journey marked by rituals and traditions that honor the deceased's life and ensure their peace in the world beyond. However, for many concubines in ancient China, death did not guarantee this final act of respect. The intricacies of burial rites, particularly for those without male offspring, further emphasized the tenuous societal position these women occupied, even in death. In Confucian thought, which heavily influenced Chinese societal norms, burial practices were not merely ritualistic. They bore significance for the living and the departed. Proper burial ensured harmony in the afterlife, while neglect could lead to a restless spirit, potentially bringing misfortune to those left behind. Given this cultural backdrop, the denial of proper burial rites to concubines was particularly poignant. A concubine's burial was largely determined by her status at the time of death and the presence or lack of male offspring. Those who had borne male heirs, especially if these heirs had achieved prominence, often received more respectable burials, sometimes even alongside the families they had served. Their graves might be marked, their contributions acknowledged, albeit in a limited manner compared to the main wife. Conversely, concubines without male offspring faced a far bleaker prospect. Many were buried in unmarked graves, devoid of the ceremonies and rites that accompanied a respectable funeral. Some households, viewing these burials as an added expense without long-term merit, opted for the most frugal and inconspicuous methods. These women, who may have lived their lives in the margins, found themselves relegated to the peripheries in death as well. There were also instances, particularly during certain dynasties, where the deaths of concubines were expedited to accompany their masters into the afterlife. These sacrificial practices, though not universally prevalent, highlight the extremes of the power dynamics in play. In these tragic circumstances, concubines were denied not only proper burial rites, but also the very act of natural passing. In examining the lack of burial rites for concubines, one confronts the harsh realities of a societal system that frequently failed to recognize these women's full humanity, both in life and death. Yet, amidst these stories of neglect, there emerge tales of resilience, kindness, and quiet acts of rebellion. Poignant reminders that even in the face of systemic oppression, humanity often finds ways to assert itself. Number 10. Power dynamics and the occasional rise to influence. The life of a concubine in ancient China was fraught with challenges, marked by subjugation, and often confined by societal and domestic bounds. Yet, within this matrix of control and oppression, there were anomalies, rare instances where concubines transcended their prescribed roles, seizing significant power and influence. These exceptional stories, while outliers, present a fascinating exploration into the fluidity of power dynamics and the possibilities of ascendancy against the odds. One of the most notable tales is that of Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to rule in her own right. Beginning her journey in the imperial court as a concubine to Emperor Taizong, Wu's intelligence, wit, and political acumen set her apart. Upon Taizong's death, rather than being sent to a nunnery as per custom, she became a concubine for his successor, Emperor Gaozong. Over time, her influence over Gaozong grew, allowing her to make key political decisions behind the scenes. Eventually, after Gaozong's death, Wu declared herself emperor, a title notably masculine in nature, emphasizing her complete authority. Her reign marked significant administrative reforms, support for Buddhism, and the expansion of the empire. Wu Zetian's story, while extraordinary, was not the only instance of a concubine's rise to power. Throughout various dynasties, there were women who, through a combination of political savvy, personal charisma, and timely circumstances, found themselves wielding influence that belied their official status. Some managed vast estates, others played pivotal roles in court politics, and a few even influenced military strategies. In the annals of Chinese history, while the stories of powerful concubines are few, they are testament to the indomitable spirit of those who defied societal expectations. These women, rising from positions of vulnerability, managed to leave an indelible mark on the empire's destiny. Their tales, interwoven with intrigue, ambition, and resilience, serve as poignant reminders of the fluidity of power and the potential for ascendancy, even in the most unlikely of circumstances.